During this project, we're going to set up a simple scene in Cinema 4D. Cinema 4D is easy to learn and a lot of fun to work with. I hope you enjoy it. So we're going to create the most basic of scenes in Cinema 4D just to kind of get the ball rolling. We don't have a theme set up or perhaps subjects that we have decided we're going to use to convey the message of that theme. We're just going to start into navigating through Cinema 4D and building a scene that we can use to render. So to get started, we're going to go up here and grab a floor. One thing about the floor, when we drop it down into the viewport, you can see there's an orange line here across the back of it, and it looks like that's where the floor stops. The floor actually extends off into the distance, and it goes all the way to this horizon line that's denoted by this white line across the viewport. So anytime I add material to it or I render it, you'll see that it will work all the way up to that horizon line. The next element I'm going to grab is a physical sky. When I drop the physical sky into my objects manager, it's highlighted in yellow. Make sure that it's highlighted. You don't have the floor highlighted. Make sure you have the physical sky highlighted, and we can make some adjustments to it down here in the attribute manager. So a couple of things that I want to show you that are real simple to do is go to load sky preset here, and it will give you some different options to use for the look of your sky. So if I was to click this option here, it will load, and you can see that that sky is loaded into the viewport. If I want to see what it would look like rendered, I can go up here, and just to check it, I can click render view, and it will give me an idea of what this will look like if it was a finished scene and what the render would look like. And this looks pretty good. It's got some dark color toward the top of it. It gets lighter toward the horizon line. Looks pretty realistic. There's some clouds in there, and I can make a ton of different types of adjustments to the physical sky, but I'm just going to go ahead and drop it in just to kind of get started. Highlight physical sky, click on it in your objects manager, and let's go down to the attribute manager one more time for the sky, and let me show you one more thing we can do. We can go to time and location, and I can actually click through this little clock to see the time change. So if you want it to be later in the day or something like that, you can click through that. We can actually select a month here and change the month so we get a different look, so on and so forth. And again, to check your adjustments, just hit render view, and you'll be able to see what those adjustments would look like if it was rendered. And there's a ton of things we can do with the physical sky, but just to get started, those are the basics. So I've got a floor, which I can put material on. I can change that into pavement, or I can change that into sand, or I can put glass on it to make it look like water, so on and so forth. And then I have this physical sky. So that kind of sets up the basics of our scene. Another thing that I'd like to grab is I'm going to go up here to my primitives, and I'm going to click on that little cube and go over here to landscape and click and let go. It'll drop a landscape into my viewport, and I'm going to move that landscape over a little bit and start to create a scene. So let's say we've got this little island. We'll throw some glass on our floor to make it reflect some of the sky, and we can put some people perhaps on this island. And actually I'm going to duplicate the island. So to duplicate any object that you drop in your viewport, you can hold command and move this, or you can just click on it and hit edit copy and edit paste. That works too. For landscapes, you can adjust those with these little nodes too, the shape of it, or you could go down to your attribute manager and you can make adjustments through the object. We can bump things up or down, make it the texture rougher or smoother, so on and so forth. For this project, I'm just going to leave this how it is. One note about the landscapes: a lot of students get in the habit of going up here to scale and trying to upscale the landscape, and the more you upscale things in your viewport, it's just going to slow the renders down. So I would encourage you not to do that. So just leave things the size that they are when they drop down and kind of go with it. If you do need something larger or smaller, again, just know that it's going to affect your render time. So now we have a couple of landscapes, we have a sky and a floor, and we need some type of subjects in our space here to start to build some type of a theme. To do that, there are all kinds of assets located in the content browser. So up by the Objects Manager, underneath that tab, we can click this tab, Content Browser, and we can access things, assets, through presets. So we'll double click presets, and I'm going to select a folder that says Visualize, and I'm going to go to 3D Objects. When I double click 3D Objects, that folder has all these subfolders in it with all kinds of stuff, appliances, buildings, so on and so forth. So I need some characters. I'm going to select humans, and there are different types of humans that they have available in this package. There's low resolution, medium resolution, some silhouettes, so on and so forth. If it's a still, I could use cutouts and get away with that, or if I want a different take on something for the silhouettes. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and double click the medium res 3D people, and I can scroll through those. Now, navigating in the content browser. Let me grab this this couple. So I'm going to double click on this couple, and they will load in the viewport here in just a second. There they are. So let's say that I want to get back to one of the other folders. Navigating through this is pretty easy, and if you hover over any of these buttons up here, they'll tell you what they are and what they do. So this is the back button, so I can click that and I can go back one step. Right here is the up one level. There's a hierarchy of how you're opening up your folders. It's kind of like history, and you can click through that as well. Or you can go all the way back to presets and just click that, and it will take you back to this screen where we selected Visualize. So I'm going to go back and select Visualize. So I have this this happy looking couple here, and I'm going to go ahead and put them on this island that's a little bit closer to us. And I can drag these assets around, just dragging these arrows around, up or down, left or right, forward and backward. If you're having problems navigating, trying to figure out where things are in space, especially if you're zoomed in like this, we can go up here to the upper right hand corner and we can go into our split screen mode. So I was just working with this mode here. I can make adjustments and work this way, or I can do this top view, this overhead view. This is pretty handy. So I can select any of the assets that are down there, any of the objects, and I can adjust those through this view as well. And I can take this couple and I can select it and move them where I want. I can go up and use my rotate tool, and I can rotate them to get a different viewpoint of them. Or I can use the right view or the front view as well. You just click on the asset that you want to adjust, and you can adjust it that way. So I'm going to go back to my move tool, and I'm going to click the little tab again for the split screen to go back to my original viewport. And I've got this this couple here, and it looks like they're kind of sunken into the earth a bit. And I'm actually just going to go with that for my render and move them around just a little bit. Now, so we got this couple, and they're my area of emphasis at this point. So they're the focal point. Make sure that your focal point is off center. Don't put it directly in the middle of the picture plane. If you do that, your composition might end up being kind of stagnant. It's a little bit more exciting to have things kind of off to the side. And then we'll fill some extra, I guess, objects into to this scene and just build something really, really simple. So let's go to materials now. I'm going to double click on materials, and I'm going to grab some materials to use to make this look a little bit more realistic. Let's go to glass. I'm going to put them again on an island, and I'm going to throw glass on my floor so that it reflects the sky, and it should look like kind of like water. So let me grab this just simple glass. I'm going to throw that on here, and notice that I can see the edges of the landscapes that I used, and you'd be able to see that in render as well, and there's ways to fix that, but I'm actually just going to navigate out of it so we can't see that later, and I'm just going to go ahead and leave it. to get an idea of what this would look like rendered out, and you can see what I'm talking about with the landscapes. Let's go ahead and render it real quick. And by using that glass, you get a nice reflection, and the glass is also reflecting the sky, and the horizon line just kind of melds away. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with that, and I'm going to go ahead and try to find some type of material for my islands. And I'm actually going to double up the glass. I'm going to use this blue one too and drop that in there just to kind of see what that looks like. The nice thing about experimenting in the digital format, if I was to do a painting and I just wanted to throw a different shade or a different color into the area that I'm working with, it's not as simple as just selecting it and deleting it like we do in Cinema 4D. So I'm going to check to see what that texture looks like when this is rendered out with those two glass textures doubled up. And that actually looks pretty sweet. It darkened it and gave it some depth, and I'm going to kind of go ahead and go with it. If I want to adjust any of my materials at any time, I go down into the material manager and I can double click on the material and I can make adjustments to the color itself or the texture, so on and so forth. And I can load different textures into that material as well. So you can make adjustments to materials that you pull out of the preset or the content browser, or we can make our own materials by double clicking in the materials manager, double clicking on that material that we just made, and we can make our own material through this as well. More on materials and other tutorials, but I'm going to drop that on here just to kind of see what it looks like. And with those materials tripled up, it doesn't look realistic at all, but you get the idea. So I'm going to go up to this tag and I'm going to go ahead and delete that material by hitting delete on my keyboard, and I'm just going to leave those two entities of glass material on the floor for now. A couple other things. I'd like to get some grass for the landscape. So I'm going to go back to my content browser, and rather than clicking through things, I'm going to type in grass. And here are some different grasses I can use. Stay away from the grass that is not spherical. We just want to use material grass for our object. The other types of grass that are being offered here do different things. More on that in other tutorials. But I'm just going to grab that grass and drag it down onto my landscape, and I can drag it out of the materials manager as well. And I'm just going to go down and make a couple of quick adjustments to that. So I can go into the tag and I can adjust what the material looks like in it, or I can double click it and I can make adjustments through this panel as well. So let me go ahead and hit render view, and it looks like we have this happy couple that are standing on an island or sinking into it with a nice reflection. And I'm going to adjust the view a little bit so we can see a little bit more of that reflection that leads us into the picture plane just a touch. And we have a scene that's starting to build pretty well. Let me just adjust the height of it just a touch and hit render again to kind of see where I'm at. So I can see a little bit more of that reflection, adds an area of interest. I can see the clouds being reflected on the water, and the sky and the water dissipate back in the horizon line, and it looks like it's foggy in the distance, and this is actually starting to work pretty well. I could put some other things from the content browser into the scene. And this has got a little bit of a lag, which brings up a good point. Anytime you start working with a a lot of assets in your viewport, it's going to slow the computer down, and you really got to kind of watch how you work. And we'll go back to visualize to pull out just a couple more objects. So let's go to buildings. And speaking of watching what you do to make sure you don't slow things down too much. Cityscape has a bunch of buildings in it. So let's say that this couple is on an island, but all of a sudden there's perhaps a skyscraper there. I'm going to double click building, and you can see now the building is basically surrounding them, and I can either zoom out or go into split screen to kind of figure out where they are in space. So if you get lost at all, I would suggest going up into that split screen, figuring out where things are in space, and moving that stuff around. So now we have this happy couple, and they're on an island that's in front of a building that extends off into the distance. I could shrink the size of that building down or scale it up if I wanted to, but again, remember, the more assets that you add to your scene, the slower things are eventually going to get. So here we have happy couple in front of a building on an island. And the scene could just build from there. If I wanted to keep the building, I could always throw some material on it to make it look more realistic. I could put objects on the other island that would make sense for my theme. But at this point, I just want to talk really quick about rendering. I'm going to go ahead and delete the building so the render goes faster. And quite frankly, I'm going to go ahead and delete that other landscape just for this example. I'm going to zoom into the happy couple on the island and put them just off center. And let's talk about rendering. And let's put them right there. Okay, so this button up top here where it says Edit Render Settings, this is where you'll go in and make your settings for the render itself. For output, we're just going to leave this current frame. If it were an animation, we'd select all frames. And the size of it is fine for now, and we can make adjustments depending on how we're printing these. For save, for the format, we could leave it a TIFF since it's a still, but I'm just going to select JPEG. It's a universal format. And there's a couple of effects that I like to use to make things look a little bit more realistic. And this is just the standard render in Cinema 4D. We're not using any additional renders. I'm going to click Effect, and I'm going to go down to Ambient Occlusion and go back to Effect and click Global Illumination. That will help us make this look more realistic. Light will be bounced off of objects onto other objects. The shadows will be more realistic, so on and so forth. But notice when I go up to hit Render View, the render is much slower because it's added those two entities to the render. It will look more realistic, but it'll take a little bit longer to render. One thing we can do to speed that up just a touch is to go back up into the split screen and then hit render, and it's still going to be slow, but it'll be a little bit faster than it was when we had the whole viewport up there. So I'm going to go back, and we're going to go ahead and render this out to get an image or a product that we can save. So let's go up here to Render to Picture Viewer. When I click that, we're going to get our render, and we can zoom out a little bit so we can watch it render. And it will go through its passes for the objects, the materials, so on and so forth. And the ambient occlusion, global illumination, there's 4 passes that it will take. And it's going to go ahead and render out my image. And when the image is finished being rendered, I can save that to my desktop, and I'll have my finished product. So you can see things are rendering out relatively realistic. Remember, these are medium resolution objects that we're dealing with, so it's not going to be totally realistic, but they look pretty good. And I can always crop this image down later. I can take the image and drop it into another application like Photoshop to add to it or adjust it if I want as well. So to save it, go to File, Save As, leave it still image as a JPEG, hit OK, and I'll title this Happy Couple. Save it to my desktop, and it's ready to be printed.